Public Health values this partnership with CIFAL York, and collectively, we recognize the importance of bringing the experts to you to build capacity in our communities through this speaker series. As a healthy built environment specialist with public health, my work encompasses striving to improve community health and well-being, preventing transportation-related injuries, and reducing health inequities. This Transportation Equity and Justice series, launching today, aims to provide a space for sharing knowledge and experience and discussing how equity and justice issues and considerations are addressed in transportation. On behalf of CIFAL York, we hope you enjoy the session and invite you to engage during the Q&A to make the most of our time together. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Ali Asgary, which I'm sure most of you already know. But for the first time joiners, Dr. Asgary is an associate professor of disaster and emergency management at York University. He joined York University Disaster and Emergency Management Program as a founding faculty member in 2005. Dr. Asgary served as the member of International Association of Emergency Managers and the president of that association from 2007 to 2009. And he is currently also the director of CIFAL York, which was jointly created by UNITA, York Region, and York University in 2020. Now over to Dr. Asgary to start off the session, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shirin, for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to hosting and moderating this session with my colleagues and friends. Special thanks to David Bosworth, who coordinated, arranged this session in particular, and all participants for attending. This is, as you know, we started with 4 sessions at the beginning of this speaker series. We noticed great interest from practitioners, academics, and experts from around the country. So we expanded these sessions. And the good note about all these events is that we try to bring in together experts from different groups, from NGOs, from government, local, national experts. Today, we are really glad to have experts from the private sector sharing with us their expertise around the very important topic that we have. And this is very important also in terms of the topic we are covering. It is resilient transportation and resilient communities. As you know, really having transportation equity and diversity and justice is kind of difficult, if not impossible, without considering their resilience. And also having resilience communities cannot be, especially with regard to transportation, cannot be done in practice without consideration of equity and justice. So these are really intertwined and important topics from equity, diversity, and justice perspective. And we are happy and thank to our speakers today for joining us and sharing their knowledge and experience with us. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers, both from IBI Group and of course their own companies and private sector entities. With us today, we have Lindsey, Kindrat, and Lisa Gabondanza. And I hope I've pronounced them correctly. And thank you for, again, your time on this speaker series. I start with introducing Lindsey first. And Lindsey is a sustainable building professional, planner, and technical advisor with over 20 years of experience delivering high-performing sites, buildings, and communities throughout North America. She values a triple bottom line approach to working with teams, communities, and clients on challenging high-profile projects involving comprehensive site development, community engagement, multi-phase delivery, energy planning, climate resilience analysis, and adaptive reuse. Very, very interesting and important topics. Lindsey's experience includes managing the City of Calgary corporate properties and building portfolio. She oversaw sustainable planning, design, construction, renovation, and operation of public buildings and facilities, developing long-range plans for sustainable development, a consultant and project sustainability director. Lindsey managed green building certification of commercial, mixed-use, and institutional projects throughout Canada and the USA, where she delivered her work using expertise, design coordination, construction knowledge, and quality assurance to bring each client's sustainability vision to reality. Lindsey remains involved in the green building industry as an educator, advocate, and practitioner. She's equally passionate about mentoring a new generation of emerging professionals in the delivery of high-performance sites, buildings, and communities around the globe. Thank you, Lindsey, for joining us. And now, before going to the presentation, I also would like to introduce Lisa. She has over 25 years of experience as both a lead design architect and a project manager, including 14 years of specializing in transit architecture. Her early career focused on a variety of building types as well as public community facilities. This history of working in community-focused architecture informs her approach to transit design and strengthens her belief that transit facilities and transit systems are community-enhanced endeavors. Lisa's expertise include the station and transit system, concept design, design development, urban design, client and stakeholder relations, code compliance, value engineering, and construction management. Lisa understands all facets of project delivery for both DBB and AFB projects and has proven experience in the complexities of delivering cost-effective, high-quality architects while meeting functionality, constructability, resilience, and beauty. Her expertise and experience and understanding of the complexities of diverse project procurement environments enables her to partner with client and stakeholder groups alike to build consensus without compromising design, intent or integrity. Lisa is an award-winning architect who designs with elegance and simplicity. Lisa and Lindsey, thank you again for joining and looking forward to your presentation. I'm sure our audience and participants are looking forward to learning from your experience and knowledge. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you. Oh, right back to me again. Okay. Well, I think that introduction was very detailed and amazing. So there's not really that much more interesting to add other than in my role with Intuitive, we're a consulting engineering company. I am the director of sustainable consulting and I get to work on amazing projects with folks like Lisa and her team across Canada and the US. And we focus on sustainability and sustainable design and development, planning, and the building and site context to ensure that the sites are welcoming and desirable and well designed and well executed for the life cycle of the site and building. And we have quite a broad team of people conducting and supporting us with specialized areas of expertise in carbon and energy performance and thermal comfort and envelope science, as well as an extensive array of structural and other engineering applications around bridges and transportation and really cool and up and coming things like mass timber and fire engineering and pedestrian modeling. So a really neat and integrated mosaic of services that we all support each other throughout the corporation. So that's us. And these are some of the, again, the unique and interesting programs and sustainability certifications that we get and that I get involved with and my team works on. So it's a laundry list of interesting acronyms and programs that you may have seen or be familiar with. And we've learned that for every client, there is a unique mix and a unique project requirements and vision for that person. So sometimes we combine them and sometimes we see multiple programs layered into a project. And next.
Hello. Hi, it's Lisa again. Again, thank you very much for that introduction. And we can move on a little bit to IBI. IBI is a global company, and we have 60 offices worldwide. And these are some of the offices that we have around the world. I am located at the Toronto office, which is our global sort of headquarters for the company, and also for transit architecture. We work globally, and but with offices worldwide, we're able to provide that sort of local knowledge. And again, our team focuses primarily on transit projects, teaming with people like Lindsey and others to provide full systems in transit. We wanted to give you a bit of an overview and sort of learning opportunities, takeaways, and kind of an overarching themes for the day. We wanted to sort of outline today the complexities of planning, designing, and certifying sustainable transit, and how transit plays a role in creating equitable and socially resistant communities, and the importance of creating a positive experience for the community and the users in making the systems and the communities resilient, and how important the role of sustainability certification is in developing transit infrastructure, and how over time the projects that we've worked on have provided how the certification processes provide a framework for designers to follow, and for generally for people to understand what goals are. In terms of the presentation breakdown, we will go through a little bit of history and context in transit development, and a little bit of overview on how transit projects are developed. They are big, complex projects, and a little bit providing you with a little bit of context will help understand how the projects that we'll present have been developed, and the sort of complexity of issues that need to be resolved. And then we will work through a series of case studies, sort of chronologically, again, to show where we've come from and where we are currently in themes of planning cities and transit, and where our teams are currently at in terms of development and in transit systems. So we'll our first focus is a little bit of a review of history and context. Over time, this idea of a healthy planet and healthy people, the kind of connection to our community and the land, it has changed in the way it's expressed, but ultimately everyone is looking for a way to live sustainably and a better life, and how to connect with people. Sometimes as designers or as agencies, it's a little bit of a chicken or an egg game. Do you provide what is required, or do you wait for the need to respond to that? And you'll see that through our case studies today, that we're always kind of balancing this need of proactive planning and responsive planning, and what the appropriate level of effort is and when. And you'll see that as designers, it's important to have this forward-thinking, visionary view, while not forgetting the lessons that we've had. So you have this kind of effort of needing binoculars and sort of eyes at the back of your head to balance and not forget, but to also be a little bit of a visionary. We continue this journey of sort of history and context with a little bit of a review. We use Toronto as a sort of archetypal North American city. A lot of my work specifically is in the GTA, but the lessons from this historical development of Toronto are very applicable to North American cities. So Toronto was an industrial port town, and it developed along that same, a very typical applied grid system. People lived in very compact neighborhoods during its initial development, and with industry and amenities that were close together. And there was very little daily travel outside your immediate community. During this time, inner city travel started to develop, and the idea of commuter travel between large centers and big ceremonial transit hubs began to be developed, like Union Station here in Toronto. You can see these sort of developing in North America a lot. So you could start seeing how the role of a transit station as the point of entry and departure from your city, and the importance that it played in that kind of development in the city. As the city continued to develop, there were master planning in sort of mid-century that started to include emerging expressways and people's need or desire at the time to start finding more green space, and that the idea of where one wanted to live started to change. And this idea of the idealized city and the Garden City movement that had started in the previous century started to emerge in Toronto and Canada in particular. This idea of the Garden City movement and the movement out of an urbanized center came a little later than in the United States, but the first example of this is in Don Mills, which was the first self-supporting planned community influenced by that Garden City movement. And what's interesting about Don Mills was that it really created these planning principles from the beginning that were predicated on neighborhood principles and the separation of pedestrian movement and vehicular traffic, and connections to Greenbelt, and a focus on community, and truly being this self-sustained community on its own outside of the urban center. And while this sort of movement and development was happening, there was a concurrent development of transit really becoming very, very functional in urban centers, and to deal with those sort of daily trips to and from work. And you can see that the expression of this is really very functional and Spartan. At the same time, expressway infrastructure continues to be built with this sort of draw of people out of urban centers and into these more suburban and green centers. And that sort of leads to that mid-80s-ish downturn and hollowing out of the urban core for a little bit of time. But what has started to happen in the more recent future is this return to the urban center and a refocusing on a more community-based travel, and the idea of a neighborhood station, and how the changing focus of the nature of that connection between people and travel, and what their community station means in terms of connectivity, and ultimately that freedom and ultimately equity that being able to connect and move provides people. We can also see that as this is happening, you start to see this emergence of the sustainability metrics and rating systems. And as we start to develop this connection and changing attitudes towards where we live and how we live, you can see how the development of these rating systems starts influencing the work that we do. And Where we really are at this point is that we're not creating these disparate elements of infrastructure and components. We are at a point in time where we are making places for people as holistic professionals and user groups, and so the word placemaking often emerges, and we really focus on making places for people to live. Transit projects are very long and complicated processes. We want to show you the sort of life of a project, just to sort of highlight a general understanding of how these projects are developed. These are a few projects that we have worked on in the past, and there's a bit of a timeline that shows how there's two distinct processes, and there's various reasons why projects start and stop. But what you'll notice is that the planning and policy phases of these projects are very, very intensive. You'll start to see over time how these emerging rating systems, which are very important in terms of providing a framework for how projects are enduring and lasting. Transit projects need to be here for a minimum of 100 years. Our sort of criteria for material selection and planning is 100 years. So you can start to see over time how changing philosophies or systems start to impact these long planning processes and even those design and construction processes. So why do we sort of break this up? Because even as designers, we often specialize more in certain areas because the focuses are somewhat different. I'm personally more, my area of expertise is more in the design and construction phase, so the red bubbles. Lindsey does have a vast experience in the planning and policy phase, and as designers, what we can influence and implement is a little bit more distinct in each of those phases. Projects are very, again, to reiterate, very complicated. These are just a non-exhaustive list of all of the physical and programmatic requirements of transit systems that travel through kilometers of cities. And when we start introducing all these sustainable and community requirements, you start to see how an integrated design team, a centralized design team, and to point back to Lindsey's term of providing every unique opportunity for a project. Each one is a unique opportunity, and the design team is really the central part of tying that all together and being able to provide an expression to a community that really functions now and in the long term. We'll start our case studies. For a long time, people talked about sustainability and just said, oh, well, we're building a transit station that's sustainable. And to quote Lindsey, really, transit in and of itself is not sustainability, but it is a very important part of the equation. And in many cases, it's the first part of the equation, but as you'll see through here, transit sort of it can be the part of the equation that's either responding to a need or setting the seed for the future. So that same idea of, do you respond to a need or do you plan for the future? So our first case study is Victoria Park Station. It's at the scale of a station. It was the modernization of a station and existing TTC station. And it's the theme of this one was really to reconnect the community, and it is responding to a need and providing that much needed placemaking. For those of you that don't know this area, it was a very dense part of Danforth and Victoria Park. There was a lot of high density high rises and some low density housing, commuter parking. Victoria Park is a very fast north-south street, and with a golf course to the north, which provided a sort of green buffer, but very disconnected quadrants. And the community really had very limited access to the bus terminal and the station, which were also disconnected. So the intent of this project was really to connect the community, respond to that need of creating a place. You'll see through all of these, the colored connectivity lines separating the passengers and the pedestrians from the cars, similar themes from that original Garden City movement, bringing back those lessons that did work from the past, and providing a transit plaza and pedestrian crossings to the street, and really making the station itself this connector and piece where people could go travel through the station to get through the community. So you'll see how these are some of the images of the station and those with the existing context in the background, those very dense community. And these are some of the views through those very distinct connector, the paths that connect around the community, views into the station, a lot of visibility to really make this a community space. Stations are really a piece of social infrastructure within a neighborhood, and part of it is always to feel safe and comfortable in their surrounding, so that the stations are used, and those will make them sustainable. This applies to the interior of the stations as well, that connection to the outside, and it in of itself being a means of connectivity. And the sort of edges where people can just wait and feel comfortable, and providing bike access and multimodal transit and places to wait without feeling that you are somehow, you're unsafe because you're next to a busy road. In terms of sustainability, at this point in time, this was around 2008, there were no sustainability standards. However, TTC, this is a TTC project. So for those of you not in Toronto, TTC is the transit agency, did embark on their first green roof. This was their pilot project. It was very successful. And these are some views of the station. It's still very well maintained. So that was sort of their first ideas of, how to be socially or responsible to the climate. Another initiative was integrated public art. Public art is really, it's a commitment to or an acknowledgement of the lasting impact and importance of transit as a piece of social infrastructure to a community. And the theme of this this artwork was community, and reflecting the multicultural nature of this community. And so it was a very successful project, and very recently we've realized that commuter parking lot is going to be developed into more much needed housing for the area. So you can see how, even though this was initially responding to the need for connectivity and to rebuild this kind of part of the community, how it can spur on more growth that's needed, not necessarily simply just development and density for its sake. So our next project is the Mississauga Transitway. This project is at the scale of a system. It was a new system, and it was planned for future growth. So a little bit of a different idea of the role of transit, and transit in its initial stages, and how it can develop over time, and what that provides to a community. It was based on ridership for a 30 and 50 year timeline. and it was started in 1990. So we're getting to the point where the ridership levels we are at this point. For this project, because it was a planned project, lands were set aside. It's located in existing right-of-ways and in hydro corridors and along the highway. And what this means was that there was less disruption. So in these types of situations, if there's the opportunity to plan them versus those in urban centers, there can be less disruption when implementing these. And the transitway is really a key corridor in the greater Toronto area. You can see how it connects to all of the neighboring communities. And key to this project was understanding the growth around the transit stations as these were set. The areas that were assessed were around the area were typically areas of change or areas of intensification or those stable areas. So those were the types of urban conditions that were happening along the line. So those areas of change and intensification were where really there was not much development, whereas there was some with gradual change because there was recent low rise and development in the future would happen at a slower pace. And then there's those low stable areas of single family houses that were not anticipated to change much in the future. Each area is sort of analyzed with rings of access, 3 minutes of walking, 10 minutes of walking, 15 minutes of walking being the outer circle. Those catchment areas, 15 minutes generally being the furthest distance that one would analyze the station for. In terms of sustainability, this project was around the same time as Victoria Park. The tools were evolving. A LEED had started to come up and everyone was really interested in being more sustainable, but really the tools had not evolved to the point where we were able to actually provide a framework and a kind of certification of the building, because really the system was set up to have absolute prerequisites, which we just couldn't actually meet because of the energy requirements of the system. We know that LEED has emerged since that point in time to have more, to have a transit specific, but at that time, really, we were limited in what we could actually do. So in terms of trying to be sustainable, we planned efficiently, we built only what we needed. We used in-slab glycol as a sort of air tempering environment. And we had heat activated exhaust system just to keep the spaces cooler in the summertime. We had a reduced material palette and we sourced locally where we could. We planned for multimodal access and consider different ways and amenities to provide for people, things that are simple as bike racks and benches at entrances. And this reconnection to nature, even in a grade separated system, was very important. Where we created this green wall and a green basin to make the places feel safe and connected. We redirected the rainwater from the canopies into these, so there's no supplementary water system. And again, because we really need to have an important part of a sustainable transit system is that it's usable, and it's usable when people feel safe and comfortable. So thinking about all those elements that make a station feel safe. Integrated art was again a key factor in this project. The artist selected again chose the theme of community and building this idea of building color to reflect the nature of the community. So even through the artistic themes in these projects, community is always a central theme in development. This project was seen as a catalyst for change, and one of the important stations that did this was the Bell Mobility project. Early on in the project, the Bell Mobility entered into an agreement with the city of Mississauga to provide a direct link, as they understood the importance of having that connection to transit and what that could mean to their employees and just generally to the company. And this pedestrian link enabled them to remove the surface parking lot and create a central sort of staff plaza with this connection to the station. You can see the station here in the evening and that connection over top. And this is now what their the face to their building really is a sort of entry. The station is really a kind of entryway off of a public plaza rather than a parking lot. The final case study that I'll be presenting is the Eglinton Crosstown. This project is a project that has a combination of responding to need and planning for the future, and it's one that brings us into more current times. It's scheduled to be completed. So the themes that sort of came up at this project are the ones that are ones that we're building from. The Eglinton Crosstown is 19 kilometers long, predominantly underground stations in the city of Toronto, down the middle of Eglinton. So you can imagine that responding to need in an urban center is a bit more disruptive than would have been in Mississauga. We travel through 22 distinct communities, each with their own needs and characters. The project is really responding to the place and knitting these communities together. These include main streets and those high density areas when you reach that Yonge Street corridor, and also there's areas of reurbanization that have sort of fallen through the wayside over the past, and there's suburban edges at the outer edges of the line, and also ravine conditions. So similar to the analysis that we had done for Mississauga, we did the 15-minute walking area to understand the community and who would be coming to the community and what type of access. And the hope with the project was that the impact that one put in the construction and the development at the center would eventually spur on growth up the line, and that over time the investment and would sort of blend in to a fully connected street. During this project was the first time we started hearing the introduction of the term future development, which was really the idea of early ideas of transit transit development and merging the transit station with housing components. So these are the stations where we started to discuss this, the impact, or to plan for what this would mean. And there's various conditions where this was, there are various conditions that we responded to. Out towards Kennedy, there was, we preserved for future development by others. There were some stations, for example, this is Leaside, where there was already a developer on board, and the station preserved the structural slab for a condo development above. And then at stations like Science Center, there was the opportunity for the station to be part of an eventual larger, fully integrated community by a developer, and this is their future master plan for this area. You can see the bus terminal here at and the station are the two red squares. So similar kind of ideas to those principles of the Don Mills and the Garden City, where people can live and work and connected around transit. In terms of sustainability, although this project really was conceived in about 2013, 14, the tools were evolving, but in terms of sustainability, really the focus was to certify the maintenance facility, which was an occupied building, to consolidate the green roofs, and the Toronto Green Standard initiatives at the stations were limited to those which could be implemented. And this is the image of the maintenance facility at the Eglinton Crosstown. And at the end, the western edge of the line is the Mount Dennis community, and this is really a point where there was really the possibility of changing and the reurbanizing a center. Mount Dennis is the point where you'll connect out to the line, and eventually this Eglinton Crosstown will connect to the Mississauga BRT. Interestingly enough, that would be a nice connection between those. And Mount Dennis was founded around the Kodak building in 1750. It was in the 1913, it became the Kodak campus. And so transit created the Mount Dennis. And when the industry, when Kodak died, and when Kodak, so this is a view of present day of when Kodak left the community. It sort of that hollowing out during the 80s. And what was remaining from that initial development was this former building number 9. And this building was the staff amenity building, and it was the entertainment and recreation center for the community who worked at the building, and it held a great significance to the existing community. And this is in 2013 what was remaining. And Metrolinx purchased the property, and the intent was to revitalize it and make it the center of this reurbanization for the community. So it really, the planning of the project was around this Kodak building, which was going to be repurposed as a transit station and a community amenity space. This is a recent photo, the upper left corner of the auditorium, which will be used by the community. It can be rented along with some of the outdoor amenity space, and there'll be office spaces. So it really will be the central community hub and the core of the revitalization of that community. When we initially planned for the project, the lands for the project were significantly, the available lands were significantly larger, and part of our initiative to this was to consider that future development, what the future of the area could be, and really to kind of make the imprint of the station itself much smaller, and to optimize for future development as well, so that that could be given back to the community as part of their growth plan. This is a little sketch of how the access and circulation really centers around that Kodak building. And this is the Mount Dennis station. You can see the Kodak building nestled between, in the middle there, with the bus terminal to the top and the GO tracks going down the middle, and at the bottom left, that view to the Scotiabank and the entrance to the building through a reconnected multi-use path along Eglinton Avenue. So Mount Dennis as a hub, this is what it looked like in day one. And again, because we create places for people, it's very important that the stations are used and they really become focal points in the community. So there was a great effort to ensure that the places were open and safe and always felt connected both inside and out, and that they were universally accessible and provided intuitive wayfinding and clear views and a connection to the line and to the city. And this is what the station will look like. Well, if you drive across Eglinton, it's getting close to looking like this, with the Kodak building in the background and the station building with the tracks, with the LRT running. And and this is that, again, the place for people, the exit point of the western exit point of the line, integrated multimodal transit and access, and providing a connected and future for the Mount Dennis community. And with that, I will pass this on to Lindsey.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Every time I hear the presentation, I'm always just absolutely amazed by the amount of work that's been done and all these considerations, and how there's still so much potential for these projects to grow in the right direction. So I'll get an opportunity then to share with you sustainable transportation and sustainable transit development from the lens in which I see project delivery and where we get to play a part, and some of the really visionary and upcoming improvements and evolution of how we deliver projects in a more sustainable way that are now becoming reality for us. So next slide. And sorry, that's a snapshot of Westbrook Transit Station in Calgary, Alberta. So a lot of underground work there to keep the community intact, and that one actually involved quite a bit of community and stakeholder engagement, which, as we explore further, we'll come to understand is such an important and integral key of good project delivery. So Lisa mentioned the Garden City concept, and just to kind of quickly recap, and I'm really, really interested in with urban planning and the evolution of urban planning, and how all these interesting sustainability concepts kind of ended up in this confluence around urban planning and how we design and plan and execute our cities. And the projects within. But the Garden City was an idea where you have a central city and then you take transit or pathways, motorized pathways, to get to your little neighborhood hub. And what happened is you get these little green belts and green spaces in between them. But unfortunately, what that ended up is turns into this segregated urban environments where everyone's dependent on a car, and maybe the transit system never happened and it doesn't completely serve those communities. So the need and the realization for a more human scale of architecture really came to the forefront, and multimodal means of communication, of transportation and commuting. And so new urbanism was the new fresh idea and concept that looked at the walkability of a community, the bikeability, the human scale level of architecture, where you can go to the grocery store and your kids can walk to school, and you can take transit, or you can take a bike, or you can leave the car at home and interact with the public space and the amenities with your own community, while still being able to hop on reliable and frequent transit or other means of transportation to get to another city center if needed. And new urbanism also really focused on those sort of little brown fields and gray fields and maybe stigmatized areas, which I have a bit of a passion for, and realizing the potential within those areas and giving those neglected spaces a special focus for redevelopment, because those spaces and places are usually already interconnected within the fabric of a community. So why not utilize them for their full potential? Next slide. So in terms of transportation planning, and when transportation planning really became a subspecialty in and of itself, environmental protection and the impacts of our development was realized and recognized. But the focus became on, I think we could call it maybe the most obvious elements of the transportation system or the transit system, and that was the fleet. And so the fleet became either green vehicles or biodiesel vehicles, or vehicles that were either more efficient or fueled by alternative means. and then the buildings were the next to follow. So next slide. So our buses and our trains and our shuttles in most cities within Canada and North America, we do have electrified or wind-powered fleet. It was sort of the bragging rights of progressive cities. Calgary, for example, has 100% wind power behind the C train. There's, hydro powering the trains in transit in multiple cities across Canada, and compressed natural gas and biodiesel have also made the scene. So those became really popular, but still we're looking at the fleet itself and not so much the human scale of how we interact with the transportation facilities and transit facilities that these vehicles serve. Next slide. So then comes along green building certification, and we had this really great opportunity in the marketplace to implement the green building programs like LEED on facilities. But again, as Lisa demonstrated, only certain types of facilities with very normal, we'll say, occupancies really made the grade and were able to be a subject to the green building certification process. And so with LEED, and we'll pick on LEED a little bit, it's a system we use a lot, and it definitely has its advantages and its benefits. And it's a very robust system. It's probably one of the most recognized systems. But in terms of geographical luck of the draw, LEED was very passive with awarding points to a project that happened to be by transit. It didn't really even address the transit itself. And for a long time, the amount of trips and the amount of buses you could catch in a day and where those routes went and how connected they were with the community and where you needed to go as a human, those weren't really acknowledged by the system. And of course, then the building becomes sort of a secondary or tertiary consideration. And then by that time, we're so focused on the design and construction and operation of the building that the community connectivity piece, that new urbanism scale of development is kind of forgotten. So next slide. And now during this time, a lot of our really progressive clients started to recognize that there were different ways to evolve the sustainability thinking behind how they deliver transportation systems and transportation networks. And so we've got some of the poster children of sustainable client-driven guidelines for building transit stations, the tracks, the connecting points, and all the elements in between. And so we do a lot of work with Metrolinx, of course, in Ontario. But Winnipeg is kind of this unsung hero of sustainable transportation. Vancouver's got TransLink, Seattle Sound Transit. Lisa and I were just at a Seattle conference for the women in transportation science. And their interconnected, collaborative Seattle Sound Transit system is absolutely incredible. And they partner with developers and they partner with different providers and different networks, and some of the buildings and some of the developments they've created are absolutely phenomenal. If you have an opportunity and you're interested, I would definitely check out some of the presentations that were available from that conference. So, next slide. So transit-oriented development is something that came out of, I think, a good place and the intent to do better by the way we build our communities and establish density. And so transit planning and urban planning, of course, started taking cues from each other and became this conjoint effort of realizing that if we set a station or we put a raised transit platform in the middle of a community, it really creates a segregation. It really creates that blockage between mobility and movement and interaction and interfacing at the human scale. And that's a lasting impact. So that once that station's there, it's going to be there for maybe 100 years, maybe more. And so we started looking at through TOD the ability to put high density buildings, multi-story towers, around a transit station or a bus hub or some sort of transit development. So next slide. But what happened is the idea was that we could create this walkable community and we create this low carbon lifestyle. But what we ended up really creating were even taller blockages and more profound edifices that stood between those who weren't part of the TOD, so the rest of the community, and the transportation system or the transit station. And so the intent was good, and the embodied carbon reduction and the energy reductions are certainly there, but in practice, the TOD has to be very, very well considered, and it's not just about creating density and increasing FAR. So next slide. So we started to see some objection to these big towers, these mixed use blocks going up, and cutting off the community from each other. They fragmented neighborhoods and created these dead zones where it was very, very challenging. And without a proactive and progressive architect like Lisa to say, hey, you know, we can add these moments of you know, stormwater management and safety and green walls and art and culture, they really stayed these sort of monolithic dead zones, unfortunately. And eventually the consumer demand dropped, and the spaces in the strata within these towers weren't seeing the uptake in rental and sales as expected by the developers. So developers sort of started backing away in a lot of cases. So next slide. So it's very, very important that when we build something, people use it. So humans are the key to this. So we build something to live in or use or rent or work in. And if people aren't responding to that, then the market need isn't there. And then developers and development and urban development will shift its attention to other places. And that's how you kind of create these dead zones. So some things that we can consider, maybe not what went wrong, but opportunities for improvement. The lack of expertise in supporting owners and the developers with the appropriate amount of knowledge and expertise for the project, and really, really understand the community needs and to understand what the development would provide or not provide in the long term. And part of that also relates back to using a very linear approach, a very ones or zeros approach to, do we make the decision? Yes or no? Do we make this decision? Yes or no? And these decisions were made without a systems look at all the synergies and interconnections and impacts and long-term impacts that could happen from each decision. And the collaborative discussion wasn't happening. People weren't communicating with a multidisciplinary team. So the lines were basically stagnating, the buildings were stagnating because they weren't connected with other providers or other regional networks. Next slide. And in risk analysis, of course, risk analysis is very important to consider. Again, I probably used the word long-range impact like 17 times in my presentation, but if we don't consider the community evolution and growth and development and wellness and quality of life over time, we're missing the big picture, because community wellness supports social well-being, human capital, social capital, cultural capital, all the good things that make life desirable and welcoming in a community, and it's a place where people want to stay. So our risk management just wasn't getting deep enough into those measures. And of course, the traditional delivery methods really relied on this sort of outdated and unresponsive linear approach to delivering a product. You plan it, you design it, you build it, and then you leave it. And then it's kind of left to an entity like Metrolinx or Seattle Sound to be stuck with the aftermath of that and the legacy of all those poor planning decisions. And now it's just this big permanent industrialized operation in the middle of a community. So it really creates this, I would call it an industrial scar. So next slide. Again, community consultation and stakeholder engagement was very, very underutilized and underplayed in a lot of transportation planning decisions. And usually when we do this in front of an audience, I would ask people to show of hands who's been engaged in a transit project that's happened in your community. And so as attendees and listeners, think about that. To what level or to what frequency have you actually been engaged in the important decisions around how a big piece of infrastructure, transit or otherwise, has impacted your community? And hopefully you have been engaged, but for the most part, stakeholder engagement is kind of a new concept. And some of that comes out of political activism and a realization for a triple bottom line approach to sustainability and sustainable planning. And the human demographic is getting more motivated and taking action to make sure that these planning and development entities are listening and absorbing feedback and taking feedback thoughtfully and incorporating it into the design of these projects that impact your communities. And then lastly, of course, we have not really had a good standard, a sustainable development standard for transportation systems. We've had it for buildings, we've had it for fleet, we've even had it for parking garages, but transit's sort of been left out of the loop the whole time. And so now we have a little bit of hope on the horizon for that. So next slide. So if I can give any advice or any insight, it's to start embedding considerations for sustainability and environmental management, social management, and social justice and human equity, community well-being as early as possible into the process. And so that's at pre-planning, that's at conceptual planning. That's when, typically there's a corridor or some sort of utility right of way that's assigned for transit if it's an existing municipality, and if it's in a new or urban municipality, perhaps that land has yet to be allocated and titled to that development, and or perhaps it's not quite zoned yet through the municipal planning process. But as early as you can start thinking about it and conceptualizing that this is where a piece of transit infrastructure, transportation infrastructure needs to go, that's when we start the conversation. But if you can't, then as soon as you can have the opportunity, it's very, very important for owners and developers to understand that they can reach out and utilize resources and implement these resources in an effective manner and at the right timelines and the right checkpoints so that they can make the most difference in the planning process. And sometimes that includes bringing in a specialty consultant. Sometimes that includes learning from other municipalities and knowledge sharing. And sometimes it involves kind of taking all those what went wrong scenarios and flipping them on their heads and saying, does it make sense that it was done this way? Will it make sense to do this in our project? And if the answer is no, then those resources will be available. So next slide. So some key considerations for, in terms of framing the context of sustainable transit and sustainable transit-oriented development is that network connectivity. So having the ability to connect at multiple points and multiple places, internally and externally from the community, providing multimodal streets where you have a combination of cycling and walking and vehicles and transit, of course, buses or streetcar or monorail or whatever that might be. So these multimodal streets, so you don't have to necessarily walk to get to your preferred means of transit. And I was told by a really amazing transportation engineer who I work with, that 10 minutes is sort of that's the threshold for people. And you can think, out to the audience here, is 10 minutes acceptable? At 12 minutes, would you still make the walk when it's freezing cold outside in the middle of winter, or if it's raining? Or is 10 minutes your threshold? And we found that, again, walking around Toronto and Vancouver and Seattle, yeah, 10 minutes is kind of that magic sweet spot where it's acceptable to, hop it to the transit. And of course, that leads into the mobility focus, and we'll talk about mobility in the next slide. But mobility for all and for all the demographic of your community is critical. It's a critical imperative because everything has to be accessible for everyone. Public spaces and walkable streets. Again, this is different than multimodal streets in that your streetscape and your pedestrian interface with your street feels safe and welcoming and accessible and attractive, and it's a place that you want to be, right? So it's about having those areas for maybe some shade or sitting on a picnic table and having lunch, or a quiet place to grab a coffee or take your dog to the dog park, these types of elements in the community, which of course relates to human scale architecture, so that you're not walking past a blank concrete wall for 10 minutes of your walk to transit, but perhaps you see retail windows and small commercial or residential housing or this mixed use of development, which makes your streetscape that much more human focused. Accessibility, again, relates to mobility in terms of allowing those with limited mobility needs and limited accessibility needs to be part of the community and access all the amenities of the community and the transportation infrastructure that serves that community. and engagement. We'll get into more on stakeholder engagement in a future slide. So next slide. Okay, so mobility is the capacity and potential for people and goods to travel or be transported. So you're thinking perhaps of a big global supply chain, that's part of it, but at the community and neighborhood scale, it's also about social equity and the ability for your community to function on a social, economic, and cultural basis to exchange information and goods and services, and it supports the person and businesses and the society as a whole. So mobility is really the core of sustainable transit and transit-oriented development. If we can get this right, we've got half our work cut out for us. So next slide. So mobility must be safe, has to be efficient and permanent. It has to be integrated into the community, and it has to be compatible with human health and ecosystems. And what this means is we can't be sacrificing measures that would, protect human health and ecological integrity to provide that mobility. We also, related to that, want to limit the consumption of resources and the utilization of green space and those areas that provide ecological function, such as stormwater management and heat island effect reduction and habitat and all those ecosystem services that really don't have a quantified benefit to them, but we know that they provide opportunities for environmental management and conservation. So we also want to facilitate access and a term called economic dynamism, which is really about having a variety, a nice demographic slice of economic opportunities and businesses and activities within a community. And of course, mobility must be socially responsible and respect the integrity of the environment in the long term. So next slide. So this, the approach to sustainability is really embedded within that triple bottom line framework, the three-legged stool of sustainability, where we balance environmental, social, and economic aspects of well-being and benefit and long-range planning. So our sustainability guidelines, these are the guidelines that we like to embed into the project with the developer, with the transit provider, transportation provider. And we want to make sure that it's clear and it sets a clear compass for where we're going, and that this compass can be followed and this guideline can be followed throughout the process. It doesn't mean it needs to be linear, but it creates this shared vision and commitments and values that aligns the project team and community stakeholders and the transportation provider around that shared vision of sustainability. So we weave this green thread through the whole project and through the process. And we want to be able to look at the interconnections between the buildings, between the sites, between the community, and identifying, and I'm going to use the word synergy, but that interconnected synergistic web of inputs and outputs and dependencies and reliances. And those form naturally over time in a community, and our transportation system can't upset that. It has to become integrated into that and integrated into that web. Our guidelines need to drive positive and proactive decision-making, collaborative decision-making. So we're making decisions as an integrated design team with stakeholder engagement and stakeholder feedback. And it also, those guidelines need to hold us accountable. So they should be documented and they should be measurable, and with the intent that they will be reported on and monitored throughout the life cycle of the project. Next slide. So ISI, Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure, came up with a wonderful program that we've started to use and has been used actually extensively throughout North America, predominantly in the United States, but Envision. So this is specifically for infrastructure projects, and it has a huge focus on the irregularly occupied, or sort of the oddballs of construction. And it's really, really well suited for industrial or heavy commercial projects like transit, bridges, wastewater treatment plants, nuclear power plants, transmission facilities, all these facilities that really aren't community interactive, but have the potential to be. And the interesting thing about Envision is that it's very community focused, it's very leadership focused, it's quality of life and social justice focused. And those are key elements of the program that are completely absent from any other sustainable design rating system or sustainability rating system, including LEED. The unique part about Envision is that even though the occupancy is limited and perhaps there are less humans actually in these buildings, the focus and the pre-planning and all that good work around sustainability integrity is done on a very collaborative basis at the community level with a beautiful overlay of stakeholder engagement. So it's one program that not only looks at the materials and the materiality and reducing greenhouse gas emissions and protecting habitat and water quality and energy and conservation measures and climate resilience, but it also looks at economic benefits, such as creating jobs, and it looks at community improvements, such as addressing means and measures for the community to interact with the project, such as creating interpretive pathways or utilizing part of the project as a soccer field, and some other really interesting aspects of the program. So next slide. So here's our little Envision map that really gives you an idea of all the opportunity to utilize this system and where it's been happening. And there's a nice little cluster in Southern Ontario and Quebec, and a little bit in British Columbia and Alberta. And I wanted to quickly speak on 2 projects of note. So next slide. And I know that we're probably close to time, but hopefully we have an opportunity. I'll zip through these pretty quickly. So Envision projects have to demonstrate that triple bottom line range of benefits, so environmental, social, and economic. And the categories are quality of life, leadership, resources, the natural world, and climate. So, you know, the predominantly important, interconnected, critical elements of development and life as we know it. So next slide. So Berryessa Transit Center is in Southern California. And it is a Envision Platinum case study. And next slide. And I just want to kind of touch on some really high-level features of this transit center. So it's part of Bay Area Rapid Transit, and it connects people to Santa Clara and San Jose, and just this whole really interconnected transit network that already existed. But they utilized an area that was really overgrown, forgotten, you know, brownfields, lots of concrete, big culverts, lots of paved areas, old industrial buildings that weren't being used. And it was a bit of a post-apocalyptic sort of situation. So they really focused on improving the natural environment and taking stakeholder and community engagement and feedback and collaboration with the community to actually design and explore and design some really neat features to help the community integrate with the site, as well as use the facility for its intended purposes of providing interconnected transit service. So next slide. So there was a dire need for transit and connections within the study area, and most of the households lacked a car or some other form of private transportation. So the developer and Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority actually, you know, looked at these labor histograms and these economic histograms and evaluated, you know, what would the benefits be of this project within this community. And so they planned for that, and they wanted to make sure, and they spoke to the community and you know, communicated with the community to make sure that those metrics were realized. So next slide. Yeah, so the restoration work was incredible. They basically took out all the concrete, all these old buildings, and created this beautiful wetland riparian stream habitat. And it was, you know, we're talking about acres of new development. And there's a threatened species of fish that can now pass through this area, and they've actually created these really cool pathways so that people can learn about the area and appreciate it. And so they bring school groups and community groups to come in and look at the restoration work that was done on this creek. Next slide. Yeah, again, everything's connected with cycling trails, pedestrian pathways. And then, of course, there is an interpretive garden with a monument and an educational component to acknowledge the Ohlone tribe and the people that live there. And again, some of the indigenous language and elements and aspects of the culture were incorporated into the building, into the educational interpretive program as well. So it was a very nice acknowledgement of the peoples who occupied the land before the development. Next slide. And they have this great little flea market. It's very well utilized. It's a hopping place throughout the year. And they wanted to just kind of give a little bit of recognition to that and encourage people to, visit the flea market and get people on the trains and get people on buses and get people going and coming. And this has actually really improved the tourism and the economic benefits within the community. So there's more vendors. There's actually, quite a few jobs that were created through some of these secondary and tertiary outcomes of the project. Next slide. And yeah, next slide. Keep going. Yeah, so we had 600 long-term jobs, some of them supporting the construction, and then of course a lot of these indirect jobs within the community, just because people were now able to be more mobile and be connected to economic opportunities and go places and actually have their businesses within the community or near the community and be able to support their families and then hire more people. And it's just this compounding and expanding effort and outcomes that happen with these good projects. And this was all done with the recognition that the community is going to be growing and expanding, because really whose community isn't. So I think they're set up for success in Berryessa. So next slide. And our last case study is Innisfil GO Station, which is at the center of this big, really futuristic looking sort of conceptual plan. And the client is Metrolinx. So next slide. Innisfil is a community, if for those of you who know, just north of Toronto, near Lake Simcoe, and the new Innisfil GO Station will be pursuing Envision certification. So this is a big deal. It's the first GO Station that will undertake full certification for Metrolinx, and will be evaluating a full suite of environmental and sustainable and economic and social features. And we're going to be involving stakeholder feedback and using the project as a means to establish a life cycle approach for long-term performance verification and monitoring measurement for Metrolinx, so that we're going to embed this into their sustainable design requirements. So next slide. And then the orbit, so that community that you saw on the intro slide there, it's basically two concentric rings of mixed use development that will grow around the Innisfil GO Station. And so that GO Station is really literally the nucleus of the entire community. And we call it a TOC, transit oriented communities, to kind of get away from the stigma of TOD. But in its essence, it is a multi-use, multimodal, mixed use, very sustainable community that's planned within a Lead for Neighborhood Development overlay. And we're going to try and align all the measures between the two systems to create this really robust and holistic approach to sustainable development. And we're really, really excited to see how it will go. So stay tuned. Next slide. And if you're interested, you can click on the link, or I guess if you get the presentation, but it's highly Googleable. It's a very, very interesting project, and Lisa and I are both very excited to be working on this. So thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, very much, Lindsey and Lisa, for a great presentation. And I mean, it was a lot of information and very, of course, interesting and insightful presentation. And of course, looking and giving us a very good coverage of the history, especially focusing on the city of Toronto and some of the key projects that transportation projects that you were involved, and most recently the new ones that are really exciting, and our participants are looking forward to see them and learn more about them. Just because of the timing, I'm going to go directly to the questions. First of all, if there is anyone interested in asking their questions verbally, please raise your hand and I'll open the microphone for you. For now, we have two interventions in the Q&A part. The first one is from Victoria Barr, which is, in my view, is not a question, but please feel free to respond if you want to add to that. That is, of course, thanking you for the presentation, and she's asking or commenting that I love learning about exciting work that is being done. Of course, we are all interested in the new, because I think that the new projects are really focusing a lot into social justice and equity part, and this brings new dimensions into transit planning. Question again. This is the second part. Is also a question from Victoria. This is the question that I think you can read that question yourself if you want me. Of course, I can read it for participants. Just yeah. And the question is, has anti-racism been explicitly integrated into the Envision work as part of the emphasis on social justice? If so, how? That's a question probably for both, and please feel free to share your answers.
Yeah, I can hop on that one. So yes, the answer is yes. And so in Envision looks at, there's actually a category that I feel is mandatory, but of course every category is optional in these rating systems. But so it's looking at social justice and social equity, and it's the acknowledgement that mutual respect sort of underpins everything, and mutual respect is often not in existence in some communities, especially where you have a very wide demographic of maybe incomes and perhaps visible minorities, or other disenfranchised or traditionally under-resourced humans in your community. So certainly we look at, and Envision does look at that and take that into account. There's not an actual racism criteria, but it's the idea that equity and social justice are definitely related back to the diversity of our community demographic. It's inherent in there that those considerations for those people, whoever they are and in whatever context, are that there's an the intention is to build trust and to build inclusion and to build in whether it's through the stakeholder engagement or whether it's through acknowledgements, or perhaps such things as articulating the community with local artists, or employing local people. There's a women and minority-owned business initiative, hiring people from those demographics. So in a indirectly direct way, yes, that is how Envision is tackling that very, very important aspect of community. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you so much. I don't see any other question on the Q&A, and I don't see any hand, right? But I'm using this opportunity to ask a question myself. I mean, I have some questions, but I skip focus on one of them. That is, Well, you provided really good coverage of all social justice, equity, or how they are incorporated into, or were incorporated into past and current projects. In your view, what are or what you think to be a sort of educational gap in this within the transportation and urban planning system to make sure that these dimensions are brought into actual practice and future development? I hope I have been clear in my question. It's more about the educational gaps that exist, if there is any, in your view and based on your experience. What can be done about those?
Did you want me to address that one first, Lisa? And I can, sure. So I think, and if I understand the question, and forgive me if I don't, Ali, but when an owner's project requirements is very clear on this, you know, their commitment and the stand that they're taking in terms of acknowledging and respecting this imperative, then that's something that the team and the project can work towards ensuring, you know, maintains in terms of its integrity and its outcomes, and that can be measurable and quantifiable. For example, Metrolinx has a DSO 09 standard where the technical requirements specifically outline what has to be done. And in lieu of that, though, or in absence of that, that's where I see is the biggest threat / opportunity for a transportation provider, transit provider to sort of, you know, fill in that gap and slide in that last piece of the puzzle, is that they need to define in their project requirements, in a documented commitment, a policy, a technical guideline, a standard, something that can be used and held up to the microscope to say, this is our commitment and this is where we stand on these issues. I think that's probably the most effective way of doing it. And that, of course, the education piece from that is that, you know, part of the responsibility is on the provider, but part of the responsibility is also with us to make sure that we're having those conversations and that, you know, everything is clear and transparent, and that these intentions are clearly articulated to the community.
I wanted to add a bit as well to the education piece. There's a lot of things to learn. There's the education component when one is in university or in college and it's sort of structured. And then there's the continuing education as professionals, and where, because again, we're in a busy world and it's hard to kind of always remember those first principle ideas of walking the neighborhood and understanding your community. Something like Envision gives you that framework and those kind of rules of thumb as something that you can kind of keep in your back pocket. So Envision coming in and being a kind of overarching kind of framework for me is something that I'm taking into my practice as something that people can kind of use, whether it's structured in a point certification process, but even just as a first principle idea, remember these 5 points, because I really think those are very critical in the development of where we're at and where transit and community building is going.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you again for your time and sharing your expertise and experience with our participants. And I'm giving the floor to Shirin to give some information about the future event. And thank you all the participants for staying with us until this time. Thank you. Back to you, Shirin.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo Ali. Thank you so much, Lisa and Lindsey, for the great presentation and insights, and thanks everyone for participation. So in terms of next session will be on July 6th, and it will cover inclusivity, zoning, and gender-based design. And it would be during the same time from 12 to 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. So looking forward to seeing you all in the next session. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.